It will be.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the engineering discipline lecture series. This is Will Jessup. Will, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Will Jessup. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I started out as a prospective architecture major and ended up switching to engineering after an internship experience that proved that architecture wasn't quite for me. Went into general engineering at Clemson, and from there ended up choosing civil um, because of its closeness to architecture, but more of a hands-on problem solving kind of discipline. Um, I actually roomed with Ben freshman year, and he went the industrial route. I went civil, and it was cool to see our disciplines line up there for a little bit at the start, and then we kind of ventured off on our own ways. But I think civil's been the best thing for me so far. You're
Well, I'm
muted.
sorry, I'm muted. Okay, going back to freshman year, back when we lived together, can you just tell me about that, general engineering sort of freshman year, what you liked in it, what you didn't like in it?
Okay. So the general engineering kind of just felt like, just that, the general engineering track. It didn't feel like it was specific to any one discipline, which was good in that it kind of touched on a lot of things. Like we learned how to use Excel pretty proficiently early on, which was helpful. And I think any and all engineering disciplines. However, we also were required to take MATLAB that next semester. And I haven't touched MATLAB since that course, to be completely honest. But it was cool in that it opened up a new kind of like language of problem solving that I'd never really experienced before. Um, and then going into like the next year of civil, starting with AutoCAD, that was the main kind of like the first differentiator from like mechanical to civil to industrial and electrical and all the other ones. I'm not entirely sure what the other disciplines do, but I know mechanical does SolidWorks, which is a 3D application versus AutoCAD, which is 2D. But there is a push from the industry side, from the civil department, to start having undergraduates learn how to use Revit rather than AutoCAD, because AutoCAD is slowly getting phased out due to its lack of 3D detail. Whereas in Revit, you can go and construct floor plans, buildings, whatever, and then just click on the 3D view and you have that entire 3D application while building it 2D basically. So I think that could be a cool upgrade, I guess, to the civil course load in the near future. But general was good in that it helped lead towards those decisions and lead away from certain disciplines that focus more on, like, for me, I wanted nothing to do with MATLAB. So I chose civil, which is very heavy on the application and like realistic side rather than the coding and programming. So it's not for me.
Okay, well, you talked about you didn't want anything to do with MATLAB. There had to be more that went into your decision to go civil. Can you tell me more about that? What happened freshman year? Were there any people you talked to who convinced you to go civil? I know people I talked to convinced me to go industrial. So I wonder how it happened for you.
So for me, my freshman fall, I decided to pledge for a fraternity. And here at Clemson, we do homecoming week. And homecoming week consists of float builds on Bowman Field. And with those float builds, it is multiple organizations teaming up as one float build team. And we start with a design that the float chairs have worked with for months leading up to this. And we essentially have to build everything related to this float, starting with nothing but pylons in the ground. And so you have to go up and you got to put the 2x4s across, and then you lay chicken wire across all of the 2x4s, where each hole is eventually going to be filled with tissue paper to create the overall design. And Our float had a lot of 3D aspects to it, and there were some pretty intricate plans and everything. And our float chair at the time was a civil engineering major, a senior, and he was going into the contracting kind of industry. But he would hand me a set of plans and some power tools and basically be like, figure it out, build it. And I never really thought that I would use like trigonometry to like figure out how long the roof needs to be for Tillman to be 3D, but cover like the like have an overhang. It was a very application based of the problem solving that I thought I would get into if I went civil. And so that was a big push towards that civil direction and talking to that float chair all week and other people that I met throughout the rush and Greek life process that were also civil engineers. It just kind of resonated with me more. And my dad and older brother were both mechanical. And I was also kind of looking for my own outlet to kind of separate from that track. And I think I found that in civil. So, and I actually just completed that full circle because I just did float chair for our float build team. So I designed the entire float on AutoCAD, dimensions and all, and we eventually put it into work and had the final float build come out awesome. And I couldn't be prouder. So that was a really cool full life circle experience right there
Oh, nice. I saw your float on Bowman. It looked great.
with the 3D tiger head.
Yep.
Yeah, I was pumped with how that turned out.
They'll miss you next year. Um, so you're now civil. You're a senior in civil, and I'm not. I'm an industrial. Can you tell me and everyone listening more about what civil engineering really is? I feel like we don't get a lot of that freshman year. Like when I went to industrial, it took someone in industrial, just a student, to explain to me what it was, etc.
Mm,
There's no real course freshman year on, the differences between every discipline and whatnot.
yeah.
So if you could
Mhm.
tell us just a little bit about civil in general, that'd be great.
So I'll start with one of the other experiences my freshman year that helped lead me towards civil. So I did the 1 hour seminar engineering disciplines class. Um, and that was where you had one person from the profession from each discipline come in and talk about their job and like that discipline. Although I think it focused more on like their job specifically within the industry. Um, but the civil one, I remember he started out the presentation by saying, if you want it to be and you make it happen, civil engineering is outdoor engineering. And that resonated with me for up until I made the decision to go civil. Um, and by that, he mean like, obviously not every job within civil engineering is all outdoor, but you are designing based on the outdoors and based on like an existing site and how to get a building on it that will be properly stabilized and prepared to deal with all of the elements and all of the like wind loads and everything like that that you might have to face. And so in doing that, you have to understand the site, understand the existing conditions and everything, and design from that. Architecture was more of like a this is what the client needs, this is the room layout we're going to give them to satisfy their needs. And civil engineering is what brings it back to earth and lays out the site for that building to occur. So it's more of a problem solving kind of thing. Like you can build a house and just kind of put it wherever you want, but you have to have that degree of civil engineering expertise to know, if it's gonna slide away in a landslide or an avalanche. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have to know the area and know how to incorporate that building into the area. And that's what civil engineering is all about. And how to connect it back to like a city or a town. Like you have to connect it to the roads and how does that new road affect the drainage of the existing road? And do we have to add more storm drains so that we get all the water off the road? And it's just kind of thinking through all of the details that go into the impact that the building will have. I hope
Okay,
that was
awesome.
good enough explanation.
No, well, I'll ask a follow-up to it would be I think you pretty well explained the difference in civil and architecture. Would you call civil structural engineering? What do civil engineers, what do they create?
Okay, so that brings me to the emphasis kind of discussion within civil. So I did not choose an emphasis, but I'm kind of more on the track of construction engineering and construction management. There is also geotechnical, which is specifically soil related interactions between buildings and the foundation. And then there's hydro, which is everything water resources related. So, like, how much runoff is going to come from this parking lot, and based on that quantity, how many storm drains do we need, what size pipes do we need to transport all this water off the site, and prevent erosion. And then you also have transportation, so that's like specifically roads and how many exits does an interstate need and this many mile span to accommodate this many people and to prevent traffic from taking this long. What are the other ones? I think there's like one or two more. Oh, structural. That's what you were saying. Yeah, so structural is another one, focusing on, like the building layout and how loads are transferred within a building so that it won't be, like compromised by too many people loading in one room. And obviously there's a huge safety factor on a lot of that stuff. Um, and architecture, I think, is more, it's more design oriented. Like you're just trying to get those ideas out there, and eventually, like, good architects will understand constructability, but in the course load and educational process of architecture, it definitely focuses more on the design side and how to accommodate all of somebody's needs in a creative and effective way. But then you got to bring it back over to the engineering side and realize, okay, well, like, you have a building that has walls going out like this. How are you going to make that happen? It's just kind of a logical game that you got to go back and forth between the architecture and engineering to make sure that something can be built and will be built properly so that no one gets hurt. You're muted again.
Sorry.
You're good.
Awesome. So if I'm correct, you did an internship this past summer, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that, where you worked, if you can, uh, some more specific stuff about it?
Okay. So this past summer, I was networking somehow with my neighbor down the street. I used to coach his daughters on summer swim team, and he found out I was civil engineering and going to Clemson. He was a Clemson environmental engineer, and he's now the vice president of Gulfstream Construction Company. So that their company has the capability of being a general contractor as well as a subcontractor, but they focus heavily on site development. So that's going to be the industrial scale dirt moving operations, basically. Um, and like installing the storm pipes underneath the site and basically getting a site ready for vertical construction, everything that comes before and after that vertical construction. So they'll go and they make the building pads for the buildings to be built on. They dig out the ponds that are necessary for stormwater. They install the pipes leading from those ponds to various places on, like, in the parking lot where they're needed. And then they come back after the vertical construction and tidy up. They'll install yard inlet drains like in the yard. They will go back and put all the curbing and sidewalk in, because if they had put it in before, it probably would have been damaged by all the heavy machinery used for the building. So they do a lot of large scale operations, but they also, my favorite job that they sent me out to was the Charleston Battery. So that is, the peninsula of Charleston has a walkway along the edge of it all the way around. And along that sidewalk is also a seawall underneath it that has to resist upwards of like just hurricane graded seawall, basically, which is so cool to think about because I watched them drive these piles down hundreds of feet, sometimes up to like 150 feet, I think. One was straight down and one was at an angle. So the straight down one obviously is holding it in place, but then the angled one kept the lateral loads from the waves in check too, which was really cool to see kind of an application of like a statics kind of course load applied to, water and energy from the sea in the event of a storm. Um, and so that was really cool to be out there. Also because I'm from Charleston, I grew up going out there sometimes and walking the battery. And so being a part of that project, and they kind of just sent me out there and they were like, talk to all the contractors, subcontractors involved, like figure out what everyone's role is and just learn as much as you can. And so I took that to heart and did just that. I met all the subcontractors in charge of testing the micropiles that went down there to make sure that those were, graded for what they were supposed to be by the design. I met the general contractor on the job and they were, trying to keep everything in check. And the battery was a very specific site because it was not a lot of space. Like they had one 2-lane road width to work within while also having to balance the residents that lived along that street, having them get in and out of their houses all day long and, cutting power when they needed to and to move power lines and stuff like that. There were just a lot of little details of what goes on around the site to make it an effective like work site basically. Um, but that internship was really cool for sure to see a lot of the application of what I'm now learning and what I have learned up to this point in terms of scheduling a construction project and how to go about change orders and who's responsible for this delay and who's responsible for that one. And it was really cool because I can now sit in my classes and think of specific examples of certain concepts that I saw play out in the field, which was really cool.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like the practical knowledge has been good for you. I guess that leads us, we're going sort of linearly. I guess that leads us to, do you have any plans after college? Any dream companies you'd like to work for? You going to grad school?
Okay, so last spring I remembered that I wanted to do an architecture minor because this is an idea I had freshman year because the architecture minor program at Clemson is a study abroad summer in Italy where you take one studio class on Clemson campus and then you go to Italy for 6 weeks and you take 12 credit hours. And by the end of that study abroad experience, you have completed the minor in architecture program. One, that's an awesome study abroad opportunity, I think. And two, having that architecture minor under my belt as something that I'm interested in but not devoted to, I think could really help out with like communicating with architects one day or communicating with clients to figure out what they want and what's feasible to build from more of a engineering background, but with that minor in architecture, I think it could really help with just communication of like visual ideas and stuff like that. But so I finally made that happen last spring. I said, okay, well, this is my last attempt to do it because of COVID. It set us all back like 2 years. Um, so I'm in the studio class now and seeing the just difference of how architecture is structured as a course versus like all my engineering classes is very different. It's a lot less instruction and a lot more like here are the ideas you should mess around with, produce something. And engineering, it's like, okay, here's your problem, here's your givens, assume this, now get the answer. It's a very different setup, which has been really cool to kind of keep me on my toes more, I guess, within the architecture world. Um, but now I'm also taking classes now that count for undergrad and graduate credit. That means I'm setting myself up this year, my senior year, to stay one extra year and finish with a master's degree. It's a program that Clemson does called like bachelor's to graduate. Sometimes it's called a 4+1. I think a lot of the engineering disciplines do it. And I actually know a couple other people that are like, I think I know an electrical engineer that's staying one extra year to get a master's as well, which is really cool that Clemson has that opportunity to just stay one extra year. Financially, that's 1 year of tuition versus 2, 3, 4 to get another degree. It kind of makes sense in the educational track for me. I don't want to leave school and come back to school later on because I don't know what's going to be happening in my life at that point. But I think this master's will be good to kind of help me to continue learning about the specifics of what I want to know about, as well as, give me a little bit of a competitive edge coming out of college, having the 2 degrees, as well as maybe bring me back to the college and like university entity as maybe a professor one day. Cause I think that's how a lot of teachers and professors come back is they start out with getting a master's and then a PhD, and then they bring it back to the university and they get back involved. I could see that being a potential, and I think that's an awesome pro for this master's as well as the other reasons I've listed before. So it took me a while to figure out, but I learned that I do like learning. So I'm gonna be sticking around for a while.
All right, I'm glad to hear it. Final question for you. Do you feel like you chose the right major?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It took some definitely later in the track, I realized, like sophomore year, that was also like heavy online Zoom COVID year. So that was a little discouraging from, the way that I learned best, and those just connections with other people and figuring out what other people have like idea wise for the future and everything like that. So once we kind of started to get back into the in-person everything and getting into the more advanced classes down the road and being able to see the actual applications of all of the things that we learned prior being applied to like real world situations, was very cool to kind of see that slowly get put together, because up until that point it was like, what is this for? Like, why is this so boring? That kind of stuff. But you just got to push through and make sure that you got to kind of zoom out and be like, why am I learning this? And continue to talk to people, I guess, upperclassmen and people that actually have some thought out ideas and goals for what they want to do. Um, but yeah, no, without a doubt, civil was for me because wanting to come in as architecture, it was a little disappointing when I realized that architecture wasn't for me because it was too design oriented, not hands on, problem solving enough. So I was a little disappointed, but it was awesome to see how civil engineering and architecture line up so well, and that they have to work together. Like there's no question about it. You cannot have architecture without civil engineering, and you can't have civil engineering without the building that goes on the site that you've just prepared. So it's cool to see those line up and to have a kind of dabble of knowledge in both of those industries. And I've never wanted to design something to move. I want to design something to stay still. So I think I'm in the right place for that.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for doing the interview.
Yeah, of course. I enjoyed it.
All right, I'll talk to you later.